All right. So great. Well, welcome guys and welcome everybody. This is episode 3 of Between Two Slabs. And I'm going to butcher this title because this was a doozy. I'm really going to talk to whoever's naming these things. It's air drying, the underestimated pitfall of primary processing. So really getting my alliteration going for today, but excited to chat with you guys and really talk about air drying and not just the obvious stuff, but hopefully the stuff that people miss and honestly, where people get tripped up and spend a lot of time learning and probably lose a lot of wood in the process. So let's jump right in. Before we get into any of the specifics, John, what's air drying other than the obvious leave my wood outside? How should I think of it?
Air drying is essential to the entire process. Probably one of the most important things. As I have this little saying that I have, it's like mill it, sweep it, wax it, stick it, stack it, track it. And that all kind of runs into
that should be a t-shirt, really.
Should be a t-shirt, and they can put your face right on it. The purpose of air drying is to get the wood down to equilibrium moisture content, which in our geographic region is around 25%. Throw it in the kiln. It makes it a lot cheaper, easier, and better to dry the material once you bring it down and bring it down slow to a point where you can actually pull the most of that moisture out. And let nature do the work. Let the air flow, let the wind pull it off. And we have most of our stuff, not most of it, and all of it is, all of our air drying is done indoors under cover with fans. We can better control the entire process when it comes to that, especially with our white oak material, because we don't want to let that go too fast. You need a lot of surface checking. You don't leave it out in the sun because the sun will bake it. You know, it can really be problematic. And you don't want to have it too wet because then you get surface mold issues. So we try to control all of that in our air drying process, and that's how we do it here.
Well, and that's a good kind of starting point too with the process. Obviously, there's tons of steps in there, and having that process be defined, I'm assuming, is important because it's consistent. Like, it doesn't matter if you're cutting slabs, if you're cutting dimensional. Obviously, there's tweaks to it, but at the end of the day, you got to control this process. Even if you are going to kiln dry it, it's important how you do it. It's not just waiting. There's a system and a process to it. I'm assuming, again, it starts right at milling. So what's the first thing that you do? Stuff's coming off the mill. What's the first step?
Comes off the mill, it gets placed on a bunch of 8x8s, and then it gets swept and then waxed. We use anchor seal on either end, 3-inch brush stroke, all 4 sides, and the logs are waxed before we even mill them, and then they get swept and sweep all the sawdust off of them, and then we use stickers every 12 inches about all the way across the entire stack, and then make sure everything's just exactly lined up in a row, 1, 2, 3, like little soldiers, all the way up the hack of lumber or the flitch of logs, whatever it may be, the flitch of slabs, because that, if you don't have it all consistent, it just warps and twists and doesn't really behave at all. And if you want to control the quality of the material that you're kicking out on the other end, that's the most important first step, is to actually just make sure that it is stacked correctly.
And what do you guys normally shoot for when you do that? Is it based on the material you're cutting? Is it a minimum of like 6 or 8 inches per sticker?
It's pretty
12 inches.
Yeah. Don't really need a whole lot more than that. With slabs, if they're larger slabs, we can spread it out 18 inches. But I mean, the stickers, they're reusable. They're an asset. So we save them every time. So we can just reuse them. So it's not like we're wasting them. We got plenty of them.
So now, is this just a scrap cut of wood, or is there something unique to these stickers?
We use special stickers. Are we going to divulge that?
Yeah.
We use breeze dry.
We can actually pull it out. You can show you.
Yeah.
It's a piece of wood that separates the material in a way in which still allows air to blow through the actual sticker. So we're not leaving anything on the slab, which a lot of people call sticker shadow.
I was going to say, for a while, we were using the same material when we were, like, if we were cutting a log, we would cut the stickers for that log out of the same material and then stack or sticker it up, and still had problems with sticker shadow. We tried dissimilar materials. We tried kiln dry materials. We tried pretty much everything until we came across these, and these have eliminated sticker shadow. We have not had it since we started using them.
How would I identify that? So I'm I'm air drying for the first time and I'm going through the same process you guys did, is it obvious? Like, am I really just seeing dark strips across the material?
A light color, a light strip across the entire piece of wood, or with either the entire hack or the slab. And a lot of times that can penetrate down fairly deeply as well. So if you're looking into something, I mean, if you have a 10 quarter or an 8 quarter slab, let's just call it an 8 quarter slab, and it's a 1/4 inch on either side, you're automatically already down to 1.5 inches. And if your client wants something that's a little bit thicker, sometimes you just can't get rid of that sticker shadow. So
it's not a surface defect. It's something that you're going to chase into the material, and you could lose the whole piece.
Correct. Yeah.
Interesting. Go ahead, Paul.
So you don't lose the piece. You could lose it if you were bothered by the look that it provides. It's essentially a stain within the wood.
Well, that was my question. So even if you go on to kiln drying or anything like that, you're not going to bring that out. You've just created a disparity between the rest of the material and that where that shadow is. And so it's going to carry to the rest of the processing steps. And depending on how much surface you have to give in the final product, you may still have it. Cosmetic, but you'll still have it.
Unless you stain it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those stickers, something that's easy to obtain, something that's anybody can get. I'm assuming it's from supply stores. Where would I get those?
Actually, UC Coatings sells them now, but these came out of Canada. I don't remember. I think it's called Breeze Dry. Right?
We also sell them too.
We do?
Yeah.
We sell them too.
Yeah. Yes, there are places you can get them. Where we get them is from a group outside of the country, because we work with a group that is actually procuring it from fallen material. We have the relationship in a place where we can sell them here within the United States. There are other groups that do sell them as well. It just depends on the relationships that you currently have set up.
Got it. But again, something that I should invest in. If I'm air drying, I should invest in this.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. 100%.
So you said something else that I caught in you're very fast, and I need to learn that acronym process, but waxing a log makes a lot of sense. Why am I waxing each individual board?
It helps maintain the integrity of the end of the board, so you don't get a lot of end checking. It theoretically prevents that from happening because you're slowing that moisture loss from the end of the board, even from the end, just the surface area around it, not just specifically the end grain, but the face grain too, all the way around, and the edge. It's just we've been doing it for many years now. I don't know how long.
It's almost from the beginning. We've been waxing almost from the beginning. The thicker the material, the more moisture that has to leave the material, because that's essentially what air drying is pulling the moisture out of the wood in a way in which it becomes an equilibrium with the environment, which it's going to be in its final resting position. So if you were to imagine a board being a set of coffee straws, and you were to start sucking on the end of those straws, the moisture leaving the very tips of the straws would happen very quickly versus the moisture that's leaving the middle of the straw. And the reality is, if you shorten that by putting wax on the ends, you cause the actual movement of moisture to move slower through other channels or other pores within the material that actually allows you to dry it in a way in which it prevents end checking. So it's a complicated way of shortening or prolonging the drying process to where the board is shrinking at a rate in which it's not causing itself to crack or twist.
And I would think that would be even more sort of like that problem could be even worse in a dimensional pack, where there's even going to be, it's a struggle to get airflow through that, is just for the interior boards anyways, because you're going to have, obviously the outer stuff is getting more exposure to just free flowing air and some ambient light and things like that. And so it probably becomes even more important to sort of preserve those interior boards that may just be the only thing that's seeing anything sort of fully exposed is going to be those ends. So those are probably even more at risk than top boards, outer boards. So it probably even more of a need in that case to preserve those inner boards.
Probably the biggest need is in slabs. I'm like, it's
really?
Definitely a need in all lumber. Don't get us wrong. But if you have a very wide slab, you have a lot of moisture that's sitting within one board. The moisture is willing to leave the ends faster than the middle of the board. So the reality is, if you want to really get the best results out of your drying efforts, sealing the ends in a way in which you can eliminate that is good. The other thing to think about, and Kelly from Repurpose Savannah, I'm sure you guys deal with a lot of salvage material, and salvage material has already gone through 100 years of air drying in the building in which it's been sitting in. And you're at a point now where putting wax on it really wouldn't make any sense at all, because it's already below an actual point in which that moisture is, most of the moisture is left, and you're just trying to get out that last bits of moisture, where you're trying to sterilize the material as a part of the drying process. So the air drying isn't really as needed when it comes to reclaimed material as much as it is from fresh cut.
How much wax would you put on? Like, is this just, again,
coat it, baby.
You can't put too much.
Get it on there.
Yeah.
But like, I'm assuming that it's, I take each end of the board, maybe 6 inches, again, 6 to 8 inches from the edge, 4 inches.
A stain brush that you use for your deck. It's about 4 inches wide. Dip it in and just that whole length, 4 inches.
Special wax or same wax you use for logs?
Anchor seal.
Yeah, anchor seal, which we do not sell.
We do not sell. We get that from UC Coatings.
Great, that's great. You know, it's an opportunity, Paul, for the future. Yeah, if you want to get in the wax game.
Yeah. Barrels of that laying around.
Oh, and there's people that use other coatings. Like there's people that use old paint. Every wood species air dries differently. So certain woods, a paint is going to work just fine. Woods like white oak, which is what we mill a lot here at Baltimore Fallen Lumber, is something that needs a lot of wax, and the pores really need to be sealed well. So it really comes down to what the material you're working with, how thick the material is, and how long the material is too.
And where you are in the country too.
Yeah.
What would be a general rule of thumb, right? So if you looked at, obviously you can't run through every species or things like that, but I'm assuming there's probably a category of species that just some is good and it just can be quick, like you said, white oak. But if I've got another species, any ones that we should, like, people should worry about, like, oh man, this is just a tough one, you should really pay extra attention to this species or to this category or region.
If you do it the same every time, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So lots of wax, 4-inch brush. Don't even think.
You can't overdo the
Just
wax. I'm like, you just can't. I mean, there's some people that wax the whole board. The reality is water is still, or moisture is still going to get through. But if you were to put it into groups, as you're saying, Aaron, walnut and white oak or red oak, the oaks and the walnuts, those are the two that they have complex cellular makeups that cause difficulty in drying, period. Cherry, maple, ash, elm, those woods are going to dry, softwoods. They dry far easier in a way in which waxing isn't really as necessary. So but it does help the outcome, and it does give you a better yield in your effort. So to John's point, wax everything, because in the end, it actually is going to give you a better product. If you don't wax oaks and walnuts, you will suffer a fair bit of loss just because of the way those woods air dry.
Got it. So on that note, just because it made me think of it, we're talking about sensitivity, sort of region and stuff like that. What about time of year, season? Like how much do we have to pay attention to that as far as adjusting our process?
That was a frustrating process to learn. So there's different regions around the country in terms of climate zone to how much humidity exists in the atmosphere. Believe it or not, humidity and dew point play a really large part to air drying material. And in our region here in Baltimore and Maryland, it's pretty average, but we see a very high humidity in August right now and very low humidity in February. And there are certain woods that you benefit from milling at different times of the year, especially considering what kind of conditions you're air drying them in. Certain woods like maple, like hard maple, has sugar in it. That's where maple syrup comes from. The sugar actually combines with mold spores in the air to produce mold that grows on the surface of the lumber. If you were to do it in humid months, it almost happens immediately. Yeah. Where if you were to dry that material when it's less humid and the dew point in the evening and the morning is lower, you're actually going to avoid having that problem.
Elm does the same thing.
Yeah, elm does it, sycamore can do it. So it really depends on your region. It depends on your air drying setup, but knowing the woods in which you're milling and the type of time frame throughout the year in which you're milling them and when you procured them, all of those parts can play into the recipe of getting a successful outcome from fresh cut and air drying.
So one thing I do want to add is to make sure that you stack your, not everybody has the luxury of putting their material inside to air dry with fans. So if you have to do it outside, either use shade cloth, use a piece of tin, something to keep the sun beating directly off of it, and make sure that you're facing the prevailing wind. And if you don't know what the prevailing wind is where you are, find the closest airport. Runways are always oriented with the prevailing wind. So if it's pointing north and south, rotate your stacks so that the stickers are facing north and south, so you can get that airflow through. If it's running east to west, rotate the stacks so the stickers are facing east to west. It's a real easy way to find out which way the wind's coming from.
Interesting. And it makes that much of a difference.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
100%.
Yeah. The wood can only release so much moisture in a given time frame. So if Mother Nature is blowing through a pack of material and just a lot of air movement is going through it, you're actually pulling too much moisture off the surface of the wood, which doesn't allow for the moisture that's sitting within the wood to come to the surface to be pulled off again. You're essentially drying the shell faster than the core. And the goal is to be able to dry the shell and the core at a rate in which is similar to each other. So too much wind will dry your shell to a point in which it'll close up and it won't allow for the moisture to come to the surface and be pulled off.
So if I had to rank it, then obviously, like you said, John, we're talking about a lot of space, a lot of infrastructures. It's not like everybody has the luxury of organizing this, to their perfect design. But it sounds like obviously being covered is critical. Having good airflow, if you can't be in a building, is next. But the preference really is to be in a building where you're controlling that airflow. When you're not really relying on wind, you're not relying on Mother Nature. Like, hey, I'm going to put this in a box where I can create the right circulation, to your point, Paul, to say, because there's too much and there's too little, and we're really trying to hit that sweet spot. And then you factor in Mother Nature, you factor in the material types and the different realities of that.
Correct.
Controlling it's the best.
Controlling it is the best, but it's still technically that's considered pre-drying in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's still air drying, but it's a very calculated decision in terms of how we're doing it. We're also drying white oak and walnut. So we've learned over the years in our region, and where our sawmill location is located is very windy. So we lost a tremendous amount of material over the years in learning this. But I've been in locations where the wind is far less, even within our region. And we're able to create stacks of material that sit outside, that achieve the same results, that do not have problems because the amount of air movement is far less.
With that, going back to the sun that you commented on, John, and you made a comment about obviously shade cover and shade cloth. I just want to kind of go back on that point because I think you touched on it, Paul, but I want to connect the two. It's really because you can over dry, like the wisdom of saying, like, I need this really dry. Let me let the sun bake it. The sun makes things dry. That seems right, but it's not doing it the right way. Just talk a little bit more about that. Again, what to look for. Like if I'm trying to create a scenario and I'm trying to throw cloths over it or get it in the shade, maybe I've got an overhang. What sorts of things should I be looking at to see if my setup's right and if I'm actually achieving what I want?
Well, it would help to have a moisture meter.
No sun.
No sun.
No sun is key.
Yeah, but I think what you're asking is the things you're gonna look for are surface checking, number one, and especially if UV light is hitting it or you're drying it too quickly, you'll get a lot of surface checking, and that goes back to what Paul was talking about. Everything wants to be in homeostasis as well. It's a term, right? Everything wants to be equal. So if you allow too much moisture to pull off of the outside of the board to the point where it hardens so much that the moisture that's on the inside wants to come out but can't, it's called case hardening. So when you put that in a kiln, you flash that off and you get honeycombing and a host of other issues. It makes it unusable. But in order to equilibrate all of that, you need to let the shell stay wet as well to be able to let that moisture pull out. If you do it too quickly, that's when you get to the case hardening aspect of it. Direct sunlight on that is going to dry that off faster just because of the UV light is going to flash it off, and then you're toast. So you need to keep it out of direct sun. You need to allow that moisture to leave the center of the board at the same rate that it can be wicked off from the top of the board, the face of the board. So if you have a 2-inch board, you have to get that water molecule from the very center all the way to the outside. And in our particular region, like I said before, 25% is what you're going to get. And that's if you just leave it out there all the time. It will finally equilibrate to that, provided that you don't have direct sunlight on it and you haven't dried the shell too fast.
So I'm assuming then moisture meter required equipment. Like yes. You really should have one. You should be tracking.
Ones you want a pin meter.
True.
We've made that mistake too.
No, I imagine that a lot of people think about moisture meters obviously in tandem with drying with a kiln, right? Like that's a kind of a critical piece of feedback for a kiln setup. But you guys are saying, hey, air drying starts way before. Really, once it comes off the mill, you should be monitoring that and watching it because, as you said, Paul, it's a controlled process. You're trying to walk it into the kiln, not necessarily just leave it there for a while. Like, yeah, it's better. Let's throw it in the kiln and go to the next thing. So would you recommend, what's your best recommendation? Is that, once a week, every couple of weeks? What should I be looking at for my material as far as testing it with a meter when I'm air drying?
In terms of hardwoods, the rule of thumb that everyone will tell you can look up is that you want it to air dry for 1 year per inch in thickness in which it was cut. So the idea of testing it every 3 months is just kind of pushing the envelope in so many ways in terms of really seeing if it's dropped faster than that. There is a place in which certain woods and certain thicknesses can dry faster, and you can kind of zoom in on the ability to do that in a quicker way. But the reality is I'd say wait a year. And if you're not close to 30% within that first year, somewhere within the 30s, then something's not going right. I will also say that a lot of moisture meters struggle over 30%. So the better the moisture meter, the better the results. Definitely a very difficult thing to gauge, but it's something that as you continue to do it, you'll learn. No different than cooking. The first time you make a recipe versus the 10th time you make a recipe, it probably tastes better on round 10. So it's important to keep good data along the way of really tracking your results, paying attention to where it's at, recognizing how thick it was, recognizing when the tree was cut down. All those factors actually play into it because all of the drying defects that everyone loves to point at kiln drying actually occur from air drying. It's something that you don't actually see until the board is fully kiln dried. Then all of those cracks and for the case hardening element, which is one of many that John was just mentioning, it actually occurs sometimes within the first 10 hours of the board being cut, and you won't even see it. You'll see it literally at the very last moment, and you honestly will blame it on the kiln. Most people do, but it actually occurred from the air drying state.
So that's an interesting point, though, about sort of the nature of the meter and the time that it takes. Like it's a very long time. Obviously, everything in wood is. I've learned that much. That everything in wood takes time. Takes time. Mother Nature takes time. But it sounds like from a metering perspective, there could be value there too, as far as just understanding your setup. To John's point earlier, it's like if I'm constantly recording, I don't have to test all the time, but if I keep running material through my setup and see how well it dries over those long periods, now I'm like, hey, my setup is great. Or it's not. Like you can kind of compare the two to say that, hey, I'm not getting consistent results out of my air drying space, or I am, and it's great. And I'm pleased with the way it's operating. So it seems like, again, critical piece of hardware. What's your favorite meter? What's the meter du jour at BFL? What's our favorite brand?
Lignomat J2000. We sell those. I'm kidding. We don't. But we do.
Yeah, no, it's a great moisture meter. I'll say if you're drying softwoods, a lot of what we're talking about isn't nearly as involved. That there is definitely similar steps are played, but it is not as involved. And moisture meters, be sure to read like which woods they do cover in terms of what they're able to read. There's some moisture meters out there that are designed to read plywood, oak, and drywall. That's not the one you want. You want to make sure you're getting a moisture meter that's designed to read wood.
And again, like you said, one that the pin style that's actually going to do an interior measurement. Got it.
In using a moisture meter, you're only able to really test the moisture that is sitting between the tips of the pins. So a lot of people buy a pinned meter and the pins are very short. And carry that as far as you can in the wood. And a lot of people think that that result is what it means in terms of moisture content. But the reality is what's in the core of the board is actually what the moisture content is. And so getting a moisture meter that has pins that are long enough for the material that you commonly mill. Here, we mill a lot of 8 and 10 quarter, which means we're using 2.5 inch long pins to make sure that the core of the material is truly dry.
Got it. And that, I imagine that that's probably burned a lot of people on false results measuring, especially if you've got case.
Yeah, it's totally. It's
an easy thing to miss because you just assume. And if you're in like a case hardening situation and you're only measuring the case, you're like, this is great. Let's go.
Dry. Yeah, totally dry.
We had our favorite moisture meter tell us that the board read 99.9%. We didn't think to read the instructions to let us know that the battery was low.
Yeah.
So it's like there's a ton of things that play into all of these things, and mistakes are easily made. And yet it means a whole lot in terms of the final outcome of whatever you're making from it, whether it be a raw board or a finished product.
Know your tools, man. Know your tools. That's the critical piece.
That was a Delmhurst.
Read the instruction booklet.
Yeah, it was a Delmhurst moisture. Darn.
What's that, John?
That was a Delmhurst moisture meter.
That was the J45.
I don't know.
Yeah. The Delmhorst and Lignamat are the two, but Delmhorst.
I don't know if it's Hurst or Horst.
Yeah. It's orange.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's orange and it's a great meter. That's all you need to know.
It is. I'm drawing a blank now.
Delmhurst.
So I'll let you guys think about that, but I'm going to jump you for a second because there's something that we missed that I wanted to cover in the conversation about sort of setting up your area and getting prepped for where you want to start the drying, the long drying process of the material. I've seen, I'll admit, I've seen in photos of some other places that I don't even know necessarily where they are, but I see tarps a lot. Like people will create tarp shelves or sort of shade like tents, or they'll just wrap something in a tarp and be like, that's great. What's the scoop on tarps? What should people know the do's and don'ts around tarps?
We don't own any.
Yeah, we don't.
That's a good answer.
We own tarps? Yeah.
Sure.
Were we out there draping it over piles of wood in the middle of a rainstorm, thinking it mattered? Yes.
Clear plastic sheets.
Did it do anything? Absolutely not.
Great. Wind blows it away. I'll tell you that.
So with a firewood pile all the way to the nicest of hardwoods, the reality is the ground has a lot of moisture in it. And if you trap the wood with that moisture, what's going to happen is that the wood is going to soak up the moisture that's coming out of the ground because you've created an environment where there's just nothing but moisture floating around within it.
You're almost steaming it.
Doesn't help underneath that tarp either, FYI. We tried that too.
Yeah, that doesn't work. Dehumidifiers and fans at Home Depot don't help.
Doesn't work.
But
I'll save you the money.
It's if you were to put a tarp on it, it would be a tarp in which you're building a mini roof, so that you're still allowing air to blow through the stacks below, and you're just building a roof. The moment it curls over is the moment you're then trapping moisture from being pulled out of the pack.
Yeah.
Tarps are very much, even dry lumber, do not tarp dry lumber.
There's a reason it's called air drying. You want the air.
Yeah, it's true.
So basically what you're telling me is tarp roofs, good, because that means shade.
Yeah. That's
tarp
it.
cover.
Kind of like in Florida after hurricane, you just tarp the roof.
Yeah, I know that all too well. All right. Yeah.
Those blue tarps, see them everywhere.
Everything's humid. I've got mine. It's in the garage.
Yeah.
It's in the garage.
Just in case.
I air dry none of my wood with it though. This is just for the it's just for the lost shingles. All right. So we've covered the whole process. We've covered a lot of stuff. I think that you mentioned something, Paul, and I want to kind of end and circle back to this, is that this whole process is to get ready for the kiln. And I think that it's a big misnomer because you want your final product coming out of the kiln. And so it's very easy to get super focused on the kiln and forget that there's so much that sets that up for success or not in that case. So I'm just curious, both of you guys kind of give me your thoughts as far as what are the things that somebody really getting into this should look for as far as, hey, I want to be super successful in the kiln. We've covered the process, but what should I be looking for to make sure I'm tweaking my process? If I'm about to start putting material in the kiln that's been through my own individual air drying process, what should I be looking for? Or as I'm coming out of the kiln, what should I be looking for to say, hey, my air drying is on track or it's not?
I would say probing multiple areas of the pack in which you're trying to dry, I think is important. I think truly getting moisture readings from all throughout your material so that you can get an average of where your moisture content is sitting, I think is an important part. I think taking a board and cutting it in half and even just looking at the inside, sometimes you can even see the moisture that's trapped within, and really just kind of making sure that you have something that you thought is doing what it was doing, but constant checking of your moisture content when you start air drying, halfway through, before it goes into a kiln, when it comes out of a kiln. All of those probes and all of those checks are really important lessons to kind of understand what's happening with the material. The wood doesn't talk to you. There is a point where you can pull a board out of a kiln and notice how dry it is because it feels lighter, or you can hear the tonality of the material when it hits something hard. But in air drying, you're trying to get it down to that level that John was saying, which is 25% MC, which if you were to equate that to fabric, it would be like pulling it out of the dryer to where you don't feel water dripping off the shirt, but there's still moisture within the clothing, is probably the best way of putting that. It's fiber saturation point, which is where you can physically feel the moisture on the board. Now, the thicker the material, the harder it is to truly understand that. But a lot of people are working with 4 and 5 and 6/4, where what's on the surface is pretty similar to what's in the core. And if you can feel moisture, then you know that you still have too much moisture within the material to put it in the kiln and get an effective outcome from the kiln drying efforts.
Not only that, it's a lot cheaper. Like, let Mother Nature do the work instead of investing the time and the energy and the money into making a machine pull the rest of that moisture out. It'll eventually get there, and it'll save you a whole lot of kiln time if you have it down to the right content before you put it in there.
Yeah.
Well, and I imagine that from a kiln efficiency standpoint, it makes all the difference because now I'm really just finishing in the kiln. Exactly. And once I build that pipeline up, I don't have to worry about taking material slowly over a long distance, but kiln assisted, which is a much more expensive, as you said, proposition than just having it, in your air drying stage. It's like now I can just really hit my kiln in much tighter windows and get more material really ready for sale faster.
Yep. That's right.
Wind is free.
Yeah. Mother Nature is free.
The thing that moves those tarps is free.
So last question. I've got actually one question that got wrote in. But before we do that, if anybody else on the call has any questions, feel free to, you can come off mute if you have a question or if there's something that you'd like to ask the guys. Otherwise, I will hit them this question that I got through the write-in. Awesome. I'll start with my question then. Still, if anybody wants to ask a question, let me know. But so the question I got was species. So are there any species that you guys would say air drying's enough? You don't need to take to the kiln. If you air dry it properly, that material is ready to sell.
There are softwoods or woods that you would use outdoors that only need to be air dried, and that's it. And they can air dry in place. Hardwoods, not so much the case. However, you can build a fence out of white oak and stick it outside and not really worry about air drying it in advance. But the reality is air drying is pretty needed if you're going to put the material in a conditioned space, like inside your home or inside of an office building. So it really comes down to
kiln dry.
Both. Well, yeah. Yes, correct.
Just corrected that. Sorry.
Yeah. So if air drying is going to happen if it sits outside anyway. So if it's even a fence, you mill the lumber tomorrow, you put it in the fence the following day, it's on the fence air drying. It's actively doing that. So if the purpose is outdoor use, you can actually build they used to build barns with wet wood.
All wet.
Because it used to shrink and condense and make the barn tighter. But the reality is if you're using it outside, you can let it air dry in its position to a certain extent, depending on the use.
But generally speaking, hardwoods, interior applications, a lot of the stuff that a lot of our folks do, you finish it off in the kiln. That's where it can air dry properly, which sets you up for success, but you still have to have that step.
Call from the unhappy customer. If you're really craving those, then put a wet one in there.
And then wait for the bad reviews a year later when the canner no longer fits.
No, or the bugs start crawling out of it or something.
Yeah, kiln drying is really important for sterilization more than anything.
Yeah, that part. Yeah, if you've got good moisture content, then obviously there's still that additional step. Even if your moisture is there, it's like you want to disinfect. I know you guys said that earlier. Yeah, that's still an important part. Yeah. And actually, one more question on the right end. Any advice on banding? So obviously looking at sort of, the flitches and the dimensional packs, how would you approach banding?
It serves multiple purposes, not the least of which is safety, because if you can keep all those packs together, you're driving around with either a skidder or a big machine, you don't want them to fall over. When you're putting them on a truck or putting them on a trailer and they're banded together, it's just safer. The other part for that is to just keep it tight, as tight as you can. And we use we used to use the metal banders, but they would stain. So now we use the synthetic ones. And we always leave a tail on it about a foot long so that we can go back and tighten it up later after it's air dried for a while, just to make sure that those boards stay nice and flat. So yeah, definitely important.
On positioning, does it matter where you drop? I mean, because obviously you said the material matters because you're going to affect the band themselves can affect the material as far as staining them if it's metal or something like that. Yeah. Does it matter where you put them?
Put the straps? I try to put them on a row sticker. Yeah, I'll try to put them on a row sticker. Sometimes you can't always do that. It just doesn't make sense for the way that the pack is, but we'll try to. And if you're dealing an 8/4 material, I mean, you can't put that much pressure on there where it's going to actually physically deform the board. 4/4 and 6/4, you sure can. And especially if it's a poplar or some other softer wood, you can deflect that. But the harder woods, you're not going to be able to move it with just a strap.
But I imagine that's still the advantage of putting it on the sticker row is that you're sort of compressing on an area that's got known support.
Consistent, yeah.
Which probably, I would think with a flitch, it would be even more, because again, you've got maybe more of a span of material.
And I've seen some people take 4x4s and they'll channel out, they'll route a channel out at the top and put that strap in there so that they can eat pressure across the whole thing. We don't do that, but we probably should. We could try it. A lot of people do it. We don't do it.
It definitely makes sense.
But like you said, you'd want to make sure that even that top piece would have some grading on it, even on the bottom, so you wouldn't get any shadow on that part as well. As you kind of create those top bands. What about, I know something I've seen before too is people will do I don't know the material admittedly, but they'll do like a wrap. Like they will band and then they'll have like a canvas, it's got air permeates, but I'll see them actually wrap the pack with like it's something that lets airflow through, but it is sort of almost like a netting or like a really loose weave sort of. Yes, shade cloth. That's probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you're just reducing the amount of UV exposure the wood is seeing, and you're also reducing the amount of air movement that goes through the pile.
And henceforth, you're trapping more moisture in there.
Yeah,
which I imagine.
For certain woods, that makes a lot of sense.
Got it. So that's really, you really have to weigh okay, this is the most shade I can get from a UV, I'm weighing now airflow to UV, and you just have to make that call.
Yep.
Got it. Awesome. Well, any other questions? I'll take one more look at the write-in area. None there. All right, guys. Well, air drying, we covered it. I think we covered everything, right? There's possibly nothing else to ever be known about air drying, I'm sure.
There's like another 15 episodes, but we'll get to that in 2024.
That's all right. That just keeps the show in business, right? And we just keep covering more and more topics. Well, I appreciate everybody's time. I appreciate you guys, John and Paul. Thanks for coming and walking through this topic for us. And thanks for everybody that joined. Again, appreciate the support of the program here and what we're trying to do. And I hope everybody has a good night. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Thank you.